Thinking is ruining your life. Not your lack of talent. Not your background. Not your resources. Your thinking. You were taught that thinking is intelligence. That analyzing is maturity. That planning is responsibility. So you sit with your thoughts. You examine them. You rotate them. You polish them. You try to make the perfect decision. And while you are thinking, life is moving. You tell yourself you're preparing. You tell yourself you're being careful. You tell yourself you just need a little more clarity before you start. But be honest. How many times have you delayed sending that message? How many times have you rewritten that email? How many times have you planned a workout instead of doing one? How many ideas are still living in your head because they felt not ready yet? You don't have a thinking problem. You have an action avoidance problem. And your brain is brilliant at disguising it. Overthinking feels productive. That's the trap. When you sit there analyzing outcomes, imagining scenarios, calculating risks, your brain releases small doses of dopamine. It rewards you for engaging. It makes you feel like you're doing something important. But you're not moving. You're rehearsing movement. There's a psychological term for this: cognitive simulation. Your mind runs simulations of the future to protect you from uncertainty. It thinks it's keeping you safe. It scans for threats. It predicts embarrassment. It anticipates failure. Because from an evolutionary perspective, action was dangerous. Standing still was survival. So your brain hasn't evolved for modern ambition. It evolved to avoid risk. Every time you hesitate, your brain whispers, "Wait. What if this goes wrong?" And you listen. You call it wisdom. You call it caution. But often, it's fear wearing a lab coat. You believe if you think long enough, you'll eliminate uncertainty. You won't. Thinking does not remove uncertainty. It magnifies it. Because the longer you sit with a decision, the more variables your brain invents. More possibilities. More worst-case scenarios. More imagined judgment from people who are not even thinking about you. You start with one doubt. You end with 10. And then you say, "I'll start tomorrow." Tomorrow is the favorite word of overthinkers. But here's what you don't realize. Action creates clarity. Not thinking. You think clarity comes first. It doesn't. Clarity is a reward for movement. When you start, feedback appears. Reality corrects you. Experience teaches you. Your fears shrink because you finally confront them instead of rehearsing them. But when you stay in your head, everything feels enormous. The presentation feels life-changing. The post feels reputation-destroying. The workout feels exhausting before it begins. Inside your mind, everything grows. Because imagination has no friction. Reality does. And friction is healthy. When you move, you collide with reality. You discover it's not as dramatic as your mind predicted. You adjust. You improve. You grow stronger. But when you think endlessly, you stay fragile. Let me ask you something quietly. Right now, what are you postponing? There is something. A decision. A conversation. A commitment. A beginning. You keep telling yourself you need more confidence. You don't. Confidence is a side effect of repeated action. Not repeated thinking. You are waiting to feel ready. But readiness is not a feeling. It is a decision. And here is the uncomfortable truth. The more you think, the weaker your momentum becomes. Energy leaks through analysis. Courage drains through hesitation. Excitement dies under evaluation. That's why some people with less intelligence outperform you. They move. They don't wait for emotional perfection. They tolerate uncertainty. They act with incomplete information. They understand something you are still negotiating with. Progress belongs to doers, not thinkers. Thinking is ruining your life. But not because thinking is bad. Because you're using it as a substitute for action. And in the next part, we're going to expose the exact mental mechanism that keeps you addicted to hesitation, the invisible loop your brain runs every single day without your permission. And once you see that loop, you will never trust your overthinking the same way again. Because once you see the loop, you can't unsee it. Right now, your mind is running a silent cycle. It happens so fast you mistake it for logic. It starts with a trigger. An idea appears. An opportunity shows up. A responsibility calls your name. Immediately, your brain asks one question. What if I fail? Not out loud, but internally, instantly. Then comes the second layer. What will people think? And now the loop tightens. You imagine embarrassment. You imagine judgment. You imagine regret. Your heart beats slightly faster. Your body feels a small spike of discomfort. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to make you pause. And here is the crucial part. Your brain interprets that discomfort as danger. So it offers you relief. Maybe later. Maybe prepare more. Maybe research first. The moment you accept that suggestion, anxiety drops. Relief. And your brain rewards you for avoiding action. This is the loop. Trigger. Fear. Discomfort. Avoidance. Relief. Reward. And because relief feels good, you repeat it. Again. And again. And again. You don't realize you are training yourself to hesitate. Every postponed decision strengthens the hesitation muscle. Every delayed action makes future action harder. Your brain is not trying to sabotage you. It is trying to protect you from emotional discomfort. But growth lives inside that discomfort. And here is the part most people never understand. The fear you feel before action is not a signal to stop. It is a signal that you are at the edge of expansion. Your nervous system reacts to uncertainty the same way it reacts to threat. It cannot distinguish between social risk and physical danger. To your primitive brain, sending a bold message feels similar to stepping into the wild. So it floods you with caution. But modern success requires behaviors your brain was not designed for. Public visibility. Creative risk. Initiative. Leadership. Rejection tolerance. Your biology prefers safety. Your ambition requires exposure. And you are stuck between the two. That tension you feel? That resistance? That heavy pause before you begin? It is not a sign you're incapable. It is a sign you're evolving. But only if you move through it. Here is where everything shifts. You have been negotiating with your feelings. You wait to feel confident. You wait to feel motivated. You wait to feel certain. But feelings follow behavior. They do not lead it. Action first. Emotion later. If you reverse that order, you remain trapped. The door understands something the overthinker refuses to accept. You do not eliminate fear before acting. You act despite it. And something extraordinary happens when you do. The first step feels terrifying. The second step feels manageable. The third step feels natural. Your brain recalibrates based on evidence. It learns, oh, we survived. And slowly, the same action that once triggered anxiety becomes normal. This is how identity changes. Not through analysis. Through repetition. Every time you act quickly instead of thinking endlessly, you weaken the hesitation loop. Every time you tolerate discomfort without escaping into planning, you build psychological strength. You stop asking, what if I fail? And start asking, what happens if I don't even try? There is a quiet tragedy in overthinking. It doesn't destroy your life dramatically. It erodes it slowly. Missed chances. Unspoken words. Unlaunched ideas. Unlived versions of yourself. You won't notice the loss today. But 10 years from now, you will feel it. Because thinking gives you the illusion of movement. But only action creates a life. Remember how we began. Thinking is ruining your life. Not because thinking is bad, but because you trust it more than your courage. And in the next part, we are going to dismantle the biggest lie you've been told since childhood, the lie that you must be fully prepared before you begin. That belief alone has delayed more dreams than failure ever could. And once we confront it, you may never wait for ready again. Because ready is a myth. It sounds responsible. It sounds mature. It sounds intelligent. But it is one of the most dangerous lies you were ever taught. You were told to prepare before you perform. Study before you speak. Plan before you begin. Preparation is valuable. But perfection before action? That is paralysis. Here is what no one explained to you. Readiness is not a state you achieve. It is a state you enter through movement. Think about it. When did you ever feel fully ready for something new? Your first presentation. Your first race. Your first job. Your first difficult conversation. You felt nervous, uncertain, slightly exposed. And yet, you survived. In fact, after you did it, something shifted. What once felt intimidating became manageable. What once felt impossible became ordinary. That shift did not come from thinking more. It came from doing. Your brain learns through evidence, not intention. When you say, "I will start when I feel confident," you are waiting for an emotion that only action can create. Confidence is built backward. You act. You survive. You grow. Then confidence appears. But you are trying to feel confident first. That's like trying to feel strong before lifting the weight. Strength comes from lifting, not from imagining it. Let's go deeper. Why do you crave readiness so badly? Because uncertainty threatens your identity. If you try and fail, you might have to question who you are. But if you never try, you can protect the fantasy of who you could have been. Overthinking protects potential. Action tests it. And testing feels dangerous. Because what if you're not as good as you hoped? But here's the quiet truth. You are not supposed to be good at the beginning. You are supposed to begin. Skill is earned publicly. Growth is visible. Progress is messy. But overthinking wants a clean entry. It wants applause without exposure. It wants mastery without mistakes. And that is not how life works. Every expert you admire once looked inexperienced. Every confident person once trembled. Every successful creator once published something imperfect. The difference? They did not wait for readiness. They accepted temporary discomfort as the price of long-term freedom. You, however, have been negotiating with fear. You tell yourself, just a little more research. Just one more course. Just a little more time. But time does not create readiness. Action does. And there is another illusion hiding beneath this one. You believe starting imperfectly will damage your reputation. But invisibility damages it more. The world does not judge beginners harshly. It barely notices them. You are not as exposed as you think. Your fear magnifies the spotlight. Reality dims it. Most people are too busy worrying about themselves to analyze you. So what are you really waiting for? Approval? Guarantees? A version of yourself that feels fearless? Fearlessness is not the goal. Momentum is. Momentum silences doubt. Momentum rewires identity. Momentum turns maybe someday into I'm doing it. And here is where the shift becomes practical. You do not need a massive leap. You need a small, immediate move. Send the message. Open the document. Tie your shoes. Press record. Stand up. Not tomorrow. Now. Because the longer you delay, the heavier the action becomes. But the moment you move, even slightly, resistance weakens. Action shrinks fear. Delay feeds it. You were never lacking readiness. You were lacking repetition. And repetition begins with a single imperfect step. Remember how we started this journey. Thinking is ruining your life. Not because you lack intelligence. Not because planning is evil. But because you keep waiting to be ready before you act. And in the next part, we will uncover something even more uncomfortable, the hidden identity you have built around being the overthinker, and how letting go of that identity might feel like losing a part of yourself. But what if that part was never protecting you? Only limiting you? Because now we are not just talking about habits. We are talking about identity. You don't just overthink. You believe you are an overthinker. And that belief quietly controls your behavior. Listen carefully. When you say, "That's just how I am," you close the door to change. You wear overthinking like a personality trait. Like intelligence. Like depth. Like emotional awareness. You tell yourself you are thoughtful, analytical, careful. And sometimes, that's true. But there is a thin line between being thoughtful and being trapped. Your identity has become comfortable. If you are the overthinker, then hesitation makes sense. Delay makes sense. Anxiety makes sense. It becomes familiar. And familiarity feels safe. Even when it hurts you. The brain protects identity at all costs. If you see yourself as cautious, you will hesitate. If you see yourself as anxious, you will expect fear. If you see yourself as someone who struggles with action, you will unconsciously prove it true. Because your mind would rather be consistent than successful. Consistency preserves identity. Growth threatens it. That is why change feels uncomfortable, even when it is positive. If you stop overthinking, who are you? If you act boldly, is that really you? If you move quickly, will people say you've changed? Yes. You have changed. And that is the point. You are not your patterns. You are the one repeating them. There is a difference. Right now, you are attached to the story. I just need more time. I'm naturally cautious. I like to think things through. But underneath that story is a quieter truth. You are afraid of being seen trying. Because trying exposes you. When you stay in your head, you remain invisible. Untested. Safe inside potential. But when you act, you become visible. And visibility invites evaluation. This is where overthinking hides its deepest fear. It is not failure. It is judgment. It is being misunderstood. It is not being impressive. So you retreat into thought. You refine your ideas privately. You rehearse conversations internally. You imagine success vividly. And you tell yourself you're preparing. But preparation without exposure becomes procrastination. You have built an identity around being someone who thinks deeply. What if you built an identity around being someone who moves decisively? Imagine saying, I am someone who takes action quickly. Even if you don't fully believe it yet. Identity follows behavior. The first time you act fast, it feels unnatural. The second time, less so. The third time, something shifts. Your brain begins collecting evidence. Oh, we are becoming this type of person. And slowly, your self-image rewrites itself. Not through affirmations. Through proof. This is the turning point most people miss. They try to change behavior without changing identity. They attempt to act differently while still calling themselves overthinkers. But words shape expectations. Expectations shape choices. Choices shape life. If you continue saying, I'm just like this, you will remain exactly like this. Growth begins the moment you question that sentence. What if you are not an overthinker, but someone who practiced overthinking? And practice can be replaced. Think about that. Every time you hesitate, you are practicing hesitation. Every time you act immediately, you are practicing courage. Courage is not personality. It is repetition. And the more you practice action, the more unnatural overthinking begins to feel. But there is one final barrier. Even when you understand the loop. Even when you reject the myth of readiness. Even when you decide to rewrite your identity. There will still be moments when fear rises suddenly. Moments when your heart races. Moments when your mind screams, stop. And in the next part, we will confront that surge directly. Because knowing the psychology is one thing. But mastering the moment of hesitation, that is where your new life begins. And that moment is closer than you think. It arrives without warning. You're about to press send. About to stand up. About to speak. About to begin. And suddenly, your chest tightens. Your thoughts accelerate. A voice whispers, wait. This is the moment that decides everything. Not the plan. Not the idea. Not the preparation. The moment. This surge you feel is not a sign to stop. It is a biological spike. Your nervous system detecting uncertainty. Adrenaline rises. Cortisol flickers. Your body prepares for threat. But there is no predator. Only possibility. Your brain cannot tell the difference between social risk and physical danger. To it, rejection feels like exile. Embarrassment feels like exposure. Failure feels like loss of belonging. And belonging, historically, meant survival. So your body reacts. Fast. Intense. Convincing. And you misinterpret the sensation. You think, this means I shouldn't do it. No. It means you are stepping into growth. There is a powerful psychological shift you must understand now. Fear is not an instruction. It is energy. And energy can be redirected. Right before action, your body is activated. Alert. Focused. Ready. You call it anxiety. But biologically, it is arousal. The same physiological state you feel before competition. Before performance. Before something meaningful. The difference is interpretation. If you label it danger, you retreat. If you label it readiness, you move. The sensation is identical. The meaning changes everything. This is where most people surrender. They try to eliminate the feeling. They breathe it away. Distract themselves. Delay the action until the discomfort disappears. But here is the secret. The discomfort rarely disappears before action. It dissolves after action. You do not calm down to begin. You begin to calm down. That first step feels unstable. Your voice may shake. Your hand may hesitate. Your thoughts may scatter. Do it anyway. Because the second you move, the brain updates its prediction. Oh, we're safe. The spike lowers. The world doesn't collapse. And your confidence rises, not because you thought better, but because you acted despite fear. This is how you train your nervous system. Exposure. Repeated exposure. Not theory. Each time you override hesitation, you weaken its authority. Each time you obey fear, you strengthen its voice. You are always training something. Courage or avoidance. Momentum or delay. Identity or illusion. And understand this deeply. The intensity of fear before action is often proportional to the importance of the action. If it scares you, it probably matters. Your body is not trying to stop your destiny. It is reacting to expansion. There is a small window in every decisive moment. 3 seconds. 5 at most. Before your mind begins constructing excuses. If you move within that window, you win. If you hesitate, the loop restarts. So here is your practice. When the surge comes, do not analyze it. Do not debate it. Move. Count down if you must. 3, 2, 1. Go. Stand. Speak. Send. Begin. You are not trying to feel fearless. You are training yourself to move with fear. And once you experience that shift, even once, something rewires inside you. You realize the anticipation was worse than the action. You realize the fear was exaggerated. You realize you survived. And slowly, you begin to trust yourself more than your thoughts. Remember how this began. Thinking is ruining your life. Because you treated fear as a stop sign. When it was only a doorway. And in the next part, we will uncover how to design your environment so that action becomes automatic, so you rely less on willpower and more on structure. Because discipline is powerful. But design is unstoppable. Because willpower is fragile. You wake up motivated one day. Drained the next. Focused in the morning. Distracted by evening. And you blame yourself. You say, I need more discipline. I need to try harder. I need stronger self-control. No. You need better design. Overthinking thrives in unstructured space. When your environment is loose, undefined, open-ended, your brain fills the gap with analysis. What should I start with? What's the best way? What if there's a smarter approach? And before you know it, you are back in the loop. But when action is pre-decided, thinking loses power. This is where everything becomes practical. You do not rise to the level of your motivation. You fall to the level of your systems. If your shoes are already placed near the door, you run more. If your workspace is already open, you start faster. If your phone is out of reach, you focus longer. Tiny environmental shifts reduce decision-making. And reduced decisions mean reduced overthinking. Your brain loves default options. It follows the path of least resistance. Right now, hesitation is your default. Because delay is easier than discomfort. So change the path. Make action easier than thinking. How? Remove preparation time. If you want to write, open the document before you sleep. If you want to work out, set your clothes out. If you want to create, keep your tools visible. When action requires fewer steps than avoidance, momentum begins automatically. There is a concept in behavioral psychology called activation energy. Every task has a starting cost. The higher the cost, the more you think. The lower the cost, the more you move. Overthinkers often increase activation energy without realizing it. They create elaborate plans, complex routines, perfect conditions, and then wonder why they don't begin. Simplify. Lower the barrier. Start badly. Start briefly. Start imperfectly. You don't need a 2-hour session. You need 2 minutes. 2 minutes break resistance. Once in motion, continuation is easier than stopping. Your brain resists starting, not continuing. So design for starting, not for finishing. There is another hidden trap you must see. When your goals are vague, your mind panics. Get fit. Be successful. Improve myself. Those are thinking goals. Action goals are specific. Walk for 10 minutes. Write 1 paragraph. Send 1 email. Specificity eliminates overthinking. Because there is nothing to debate. You either do it, or you don't. And when you stack small, specific actions daily, identity shifts quietly. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries. You become someone who executes. Not dramatically, but consistently. The most powerful people you admire are not necessarily more motivated than you. They simply removed negotiation. They reduced options. They designed friction against distraction and ease toward action. Overthinking hates constraints. But progress requires them. Freedom without structure becomes paralysis. Structure creates momentum. And momentum silences doubt. This is where your life begins to feel lighter. Not because fear disappears. Not because uncertainty vanishes. But because you stop debating every move. You predecide. You simplify. You execute. Thinking is ruining your life. Because you have given it too much space. Too much authority. Too many options. But when you design your environment for action, thinking shrinks. Movement expands. And in the next part, we will confront the final illusion, the belief that massive change requires massive effort. Because the truth is quieter than that. And far more powerful. Because massive change does not begin with massive effort. It begins with microscopic consistency. You have been seduced by intensity. The dramatic transformation. The overnight shift. The extreme decision. You think if you're going to change, it must be bold. Loud. Radical. But intensity burns out. Consistency rewires. Overthinkers love big plans. They design entire new lives at midnight. Tomorrow, they will wake up earlier. Exercise harder. Work longer. Eat cleaner. Focus perfectly. And for a day or two, maybe they do. Then energy dips. And the collapse feels personal. I knew I couldn't maintain it. I'm just not disciplined. No. You tried to replace identity with intensity. Identity shifts through repetition. Small. Boring. Repeated action. Let's make this uncomfortable. You are not stuck because you haven't made a massive decision. You are stuck because you haven't honored tiny ones consistently. The 5-minute start. The single message. The daily repetition. You underestimate small action because it doesn't feel heroic. But your brain does not measure heroism. It measures frequency. Neural pathways strengthen through repetition, not drama. If you act once boldly and then retreat into overthinking for a week, your brain reinforces hesitation. If you act modestly every day, your brain reinforces momentum. It is not about how intense the action is. It is about how often you move despite discomfort. This is where most people sabotage themselves. They wait for motivation. They wait for inspiration. They wait for a mood. But moods fluctuate. Systems don't. You do not need to feel powerful. You need to be predictable. Predictability builds trust with yourself. And self-trust is the antidote to overthinking. Because when you trust yourself to act daily, doubt loses influence. Imagine this. Every day, without negotiation, you take one uncomfortable step. Not huge. Just consistent. After 30 days, something changes. You begin to see yourself differently. Not as someone trying to overcome hesitation, but as someone who moves. You stop asking, "Should I?" You start asking, "What's next?" Overthinking thrives on large, undefined futures. It collapses under small, immediate tasks. When you reduce life to the next step, you reduce anxiety. The mind can debate the future endlessly. It cannot debate a single push-up, a single call, a single sentence. This is how you dismantle paralysis. You shrink the battlefield. And here is the paradox. Small actions feel insignificant in the moment, but they accumulate into identity. And identity shapes destiny. The version of you who moves daily does not need motivational speeches. That version does not wait for readiness. That version does not argue with fear. It acts. Quietly. Relentlessly. Without drama. Thinking is ruining your life. Because you keep searching for a breakthrough. When what you need is a rhythm. And in the next part, we will confront the final transformation. What happens when action becomes automatic, when hesitation loses its voice, and when you finally experience the peace that comes not from certainty, but from movement. Because peace does not come from certainty. It comes from execution. You have been chasing clarity, chasing reassurance, chasing guarantees, chasing the perfect internal state before you begin. And all that chasing has made your mind louder. More questions, more doubt, more mental noise. But something unexpected happens when action becomes automatic. The noise fades. Not because you solved every uncertainty, but because you stopped entertaining it. When you act daily, thinking loses its dominance. It still speaks, but it no longer commands. There is a quiet shift that occurs after repeated action. You wake up and begin without debate. You move before your mind constructs resistance. You no longer ask, "Do I feel like it?" You ask, "What's the next step?" And you take it. That is freedom. Not freedom from fear. Freedom from paralysis. You begin to notice something else. The energy you once spent analyzing is now available. Available for creativity. Available for improvement. Available for living. Overthinking consumes enormous cognitive resources. It drains focus. It exhausts emotion. It keeps you internally busy but externally stagnant. When you act instead of analyze, that energy converts into progress. And progress is calming. Because progress proves capability. You no longer need to convince yourself you are capable. You see evidence daily. That is where peace lives. Not in the absence of challenge, but in the presence of forward motion. There will still be uncertainty. There will still be moments of hesitation. But they will feel smaller. Because your identity has shifted. You are no longer someone who waits. You are someone who moves. And movement changes everything. Relationships improve when conversations happen instead of being rehearsed. Opportunities appear when ideas are shared instead of hidden. Health improves when workouts are started instead of planned. Confidence rises when risks are taken instead of imagined. Life expands when you participate instead of prepare endlessly. And here is the final transformation. When action becomes automatic, your mind becomes quieter. Not silent, but cooperative. It begins to support what you repeatedly prove. Your thoughts align with your behavior. Instead of debating you, they assist you. Instead of warning you constantly, they adapt. Because the brain always follows evidence. You trained it to hesitate. Now you train it to move. Thinking is ruining your life. Because you mistook analysis for progress. Because you treated fear as authority. Because you waited for readiness. But the moment you shift from thinking about life to engaging with it, everything changes. You stop trying to control the future. And start shaping it. And here is the quiet truth beneath all of this. You were never stuck because you thought too much. You were stuck because you trusted your thoughts more than your actions. And the second you reverse that hierarchy, the second you let action lead and thinking follow, you become unstoppable. Not loud. Not reckless, but unstoppable in a steady, grounded way. The kind of power that does not need validation. The kind of confidence that does not need perfect conditions. The kind of peace that comes from knowing. Whatever fear appears, you will move anyway. Thinking is ruining your life. But movement is rebuilding it. And now the only question that remains is not whether you understand this. It is whether you will act. Before your mind starts negotiating again. Because negotiation is subtle. It does not scream. It whispers. You wake up with intention. Today you will move. Today you will execute. Today you will be decisive. And then the whisper begins. Maybe start later. You didn't sleep well. You'll do it better in the evening. Just check your phone first. It sounds reasonable. That's why it works. Overthinking rarely appears as fear anymore. It appears as logic. It appears as optimization. It appears as harmless delay. And this is the advanced level of the trap. At this stage, you are no longer afraid of action. You are addicted to perfect timing. You tell yourself you perform best under ideal conditions. Quiet environment. Clear mind. High energy. Zero distraction. But ideal conditions are rare. And life does not wait for them. If you require perfect internal alignment to begin, you will begin rarely. High performers understand something different. They detach action from mood. They do not ask, "How do I feel?" They ask, "What is required?" That single shift removes negotiation. Because feelings fluctuate. Requirements remain. This is where maturity begins. Not emotional maturity. Behavioral maturity. You stop being governed by preference. You start being governed by commitment. You say you want growth. But growth requires discomfort. You say you want confidence. But confidence requires exposure. You say you want momentum. But momentum requires starting before you feel ready. There is a tension here. Your comfort-seeking brain versus your future self. One wants ease. The other demands expansion. And every morning, they compete. The question is not whether the whisper will appear. It will. The question is, who answers it? If your present comfort answers, you delay. If your future identity answers, you move. This is where self-respect is built. Not from grand achievements, but from daily alignment. When you act despite the whisper, something inside you strengthens. You begin to trust your own word. And that trust is transformative. Because once you trust yourself to follow through, overthinking loses leverage. It cannot manipulate someone who has already decided. There is a powerful phrase you must internalize now. Decide once. Execute daily. Not decide daily. Daily decisions exhaust you. Pre-decisions liberate you. You do not debate brushing your teeth. You do not debate checking your reflection before leaving home. They are automatic. Your growth behaviors must reach that level. Automatic. Not dramatic. Automatic. That is how negotiation dies. And understand this carefully. Overthinking thrives in the gap between intention and action. The longer the gap, the louder the mind. Shorten the gap. Reduce the delay between I should and I am. When thought becomes movement quickly, the loop weakens. When thought lingers without action, the loop strengthens. Thinking is ruining your life. Because you keep opening negotiations with fear. Because you allow whispers to become instructions. Because you mistake comfort for wisdom. But in the next part, we will explore something even deeper. What happens when you no longer fear failure, but begin to fear stagnation? Because that shift changes everything. Because when you stop fearing failure and start fearing stagnation, your entire psychology transforms. For most of your life, failure has been the villain. You were taught to avoid it. Embarrassment was dangerous. Mistakes were shameful. Losing meant weakness. So you protected yourself. You avoided risks. You delayed bold moves. You chose safety over exposure. And overthinking became your shield. If you never act, you never fail. If you never try, you never lose. But there is something worse than failure. Stagnation. Failure is an event. Stagnation is a lifestyle. Failure hurts briefly. Stagnation erodes silently. When you fail, you feel pain. When you stagnate, you feel emptiness. And emptiness is heavier. Look back at your life honestly. The moments that sting the most. Are they the times you tried and failed? Or the times you never tried at all? Regret rarely comes from action. It comes from hesitation. It comes from silence. It comes from what if. And this is the psychological turning point. When the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the fear of trying. You move automatically. You stop asking, what if I fail? You start asking, what if I stay here? What if nothing changes? What if this version of me is permanent? What if 10 years pass, and I am still negotiating with fear? That thought should disturb you. Because growth is not optional. You are either expanding or shrinking. There is no neutral. Comfort feels stable. But comfort slowly contracts your world. Fewer risks. Fewer chances. Fewer bold decisions. Until one day you realize you are safe and small. That realization is more frightening than failure ever was. Failure at least means you moved. Failure proves participation. Failure carries lessons. Stagnation carries silence. This is why decisive people appear fearless. They are not immune to failure. They are more afraid of standing still. They understand that identity is built through motion. They would rather adjust from action than fantasize in stillness. And once you internalize this, your relationship with fear changes. Failure stops being a threat. It becomes feedback. Rejection stops being humiliation. It becomes redirection. Mistakes stop being evidence of inadequacy. They become proof of engagement. You stop protecting your ego and start building your life. Thinking is ruining your life because you are protecting yourself from temporary discomfort at the cost of permanent stagnation. But when you flip the fear, when stagnation becomes unacceptable, action becomes natural. Not because you feel brave, but because standing still feels worse. And in the next part, we step into the final integration. How to sustain this mindset long term. How to prevent relapse into hesitation. How to make action not just a strategy, but your default state of being. Because understanding is powerful. But embodiment is transformation. Because understanding changes your thoughts. But embodiment changes who you are. Right now, you understand the psychology. You see the loop. You recognize the myth of readiness. You feel the cost of stagnation. But insight alone does not protect you from relapse. There will be a morning, maybe soon, when the old voice returns. It will sound familiar, comforting. It will say, you've done enough. It's okay to slow down. Just take a break today. And breaks are not the problem. Drifting is. Relapse into hesitation does not happen dramatically. It happens subtly. One skipped action. One delayed decision. One small negotiation. And the gap between thought and movement widens again. This is why embodiment matters. When action becomes part of your identity, you do not rely on emotion. You rely on standards. Standards are non-negotiable. You do not wake up and ask, should I brush my teeth? You brush them. Not because you're motivated, but because it's who you are. Action must reach that level. Not extreme action. Consistent action. You must decide who you are now, not who you hope to become. Are you someone who moves when uncomfortable? Or someone who waits for comfort? Are you someone who keeps promises to yourself? Or someone who negotiates with them? These are not motivational questions. They are identity questions. And identity drives behavior more powerfully than inspiration ever will. There is a simple rule that protects embodiment. Never miss twice. You may skip once. You may hesitate once. You may have an off day. But never twice. Because missing once is a mistake. Missing twice is the beginning of a pattern. Patterns rebuild identity. And identity determines destiny. If you act daily, you strengthen the new self. If you hesitate repeatedly, you resurrect the old one. This is not about perfection. It is about direction. Progress does not demand flawlessness. It demands return. Return quickly. When you drift, return. When you hesitate, return. When you overthink, return. The faster you return to action, the weaker hesitation becomes. And here is something powerful. Over time, action becomes less emotional, less dramatic, less intense. It becomes normal. And that is the goal. You do not want constant adrenaline. You want quiet execution. You want days where you simply do what must be done, without internal debate. That is mastery. Not hype. Not constant motivation. But disciplined normality. Thinking is ruining your life. Because you once believed awareness was enough. But awareness without embodiment fades. And in the final section, we will close the loop completely. Not with theory. Not with advice. But with a decision. A simple one. That determines whether this becomes another idea you admired. Or the moment your life shifted permanently. Because now, there is nothing left to explain. You understand the loop. You see the trap. You recognize the myth of readiness. You feel the danger of stagnation. You know action rewires identity. So this is no longer about knowledge. It is about decision. Not a dramatic one. Not a loud declaration. A quiet internal line. Right now, you have two options. You can close this, feel inspired, and tell yourself you'll apply it tomorrow. Or, you can act before your mind starts negotiating again. That is the final test. Not later today. Not next week. Now. Because the old pattern is patient. It will wait for your guard to drop. It will say, this was powerful. I'll implement it soon. Soon is the language of hesitation. And hesitation is comfortable. But comfort is how you stayed stuck. Thinking is ruining your life. Because you keep consuming transformation, instead of embodying it. So here is the shift. You do not need another strategy. You need a standard. From this moment forward, when there is something you know you should do, you shorten the gap. You do not analyze it repeatedly. You do not rehearse it endlessly. You move. Even if imperfectly. Especially if imperfectly. You will still feel fear. You will still feel doubt. But you will no longer treat them as authority. They are weather. You are direction. There is something in your life right now that requires movement. A message. A project. A commitment. A conversation. A beginning. Do not think about it. Decide. Because the version of you that moves immediately is not born in a dramatic breakthrough. It is born in a single decisive act. And that act is available in this moment. Thinking is ruining your life. Not because thinking is evil, but because you trusted it more than execution. From this point forward, action leads. Thought follows. You move first. You evaluate later. And if you truly understood everything we've uncovered, you will not wait to prove it. You will stand up. You will begin. Before your mind starts negotiating again. Because even now, it is trying. It is saying, this was powerful. It is saying, I agree with this. It is saying, I'll remember this. But agreement is not transformation. Execution is. There is a subtle danger at the end of any powerful realization. Emotional satisfaction. When you feel inspired, your brain rewards you. It gives you a sense of completion. As if understanding equals progress. It doesn't. You can feel awakened and still remain unchanged. This is the final illusion. Consuming insight can become another form of overthinking. You replace action with reflection. You replace movement with mental clarity. You replace doing with discussing. And once again, thinking quietly takes control. So here is the deeper truth. Transformation is boring. It is not cinematic. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is repetitive. It is quiet. It is daily. You do not wake up one day fearless. You wake up one day disciplined. And discipline is not intensity. It is agreement with yourself. An agreement that your future matters more than your current comfort. There will be days you feel powerful. There will be days you feel flat. It does not matter. Because you have decided that feelings no longer determine action. Standards do. The old you waited for clarity. The new you creates it through movement. The old you debated. The new you executes. The old you protected potential. The new you tests it. You are not becoming someone else. You are removing the delay between who you are and what you do. That is all growth is. Alignment. And alignment feels peaceful. Because there is no internal argument anymore. When something must be done, you do it. When fear appears, you move anyway. When doubt speaks, you reduce its volume through action. That is power. Not dominance over the world. Dominance over hesitation. And here is what happens when you live this way for months. Your self-respect increases. Because you keep promises to yourself. Your confidence stabilizes. Because you see evidence daily. Your anxiety decreases. Because you stop rehearsing outcomes and start creating them. You do not eliminate uncertainty. You outgrow paralysis. Thinking is ruining your life. Because you once believed that the right thought would unlock the right life. But life does not unlock through thought. It unfolds through action. And in the final section, we will not add anything new. We will close the circle. Completely. So that the sentence we began with no longer feels like a warning, but a reminder of who you chose to become. Because this was never about eliminating thought. It was about restoring hierarchy. Thought is a tool. Action is the driver. For too long, you reversed them. You sat in the passenger seat of your own life, while your mind held the steering wheel. Analyzing turns. Calculating risks. Predicting collisions. But never moving. Now the roles shift. Action drives. Thought advises. And advisors do not control direction. This is maturity. Not emotional suppression. Not recklessness. Integration. You think. Then you move. You feel fear. Then you move. You doubt. Then you move. And over time, something beautiful happens. Your thoughts become sharper. Because they are grounded in reality. Your plans become smarter. Because they are tested. Your confidence becomes stable. Because it is built on proof. You stop living in imagined futures. You live in constructed ones. And notice something subtle. When you move consistently, regret decreases. Because regret feeds on hesitation. It feeds on I could have. But when you act, even imperfectly, you replace regret with feedback. Feedback improves you. Regret imprisons you. This is why decisive people sleep better. Not because they always win. But because they participate. They are in the arena. They are engaged. And engagement quiets the mind. There is less replaying. Less fantasizing. Less rehearsing. Because energy is spent in reality. Not imagination. You once believed that if you thought long enough, you could design a life without mistakes. But mistakes are part of design. They are corrections. Course adjustments. Evidence. When you stop fearing them, you accelerate. When you stop delaying, you expand. When you stop negotiating, you simplify. And life feels lighter. Not easier, but lighter. Because you are no longer carrying the weight of constant internal debate. Thinking is ruining your life. Because you mistook mental activity for meaningful progress. Because you believed safety was strength. Because you waited for certainty. Now certainty is no longer required. Movement is. And in the final section, we return to where we began. But this time, you will hear it differently. Not as a warning. Not as criticism. But as truth that sets you free. Thinking is ruining your life. When you first heard that, it felt sharp. Almost unfair. Because thinking made you feel intelligent. Careful. Responsible. It felt like protection. But now you see it clearly. It was not thinking itself. It was misplaced trust. You trusted analysis more than action. You trusted fear more than movement. You trusted comfort more than growth. And that trust shaped your days. Quiet hesitation. Delayed decisions. Unlived potential. But look at what has shifted. You understand the loop. You see negotiation for what it is. You recognize fear as energy. You know readiness is built through motion. You understand identity follows repetition. Nothing mystical. Nothing dramatic. Just truth. Thinking is a servant. Action is the leader. And from this moment forward, the hierarchy changes. You will still think. But you will not live there. You will still feel fear. But you will not obey it. You will still experience doubt. But you will shorten the gap between doubt and movement. That gap is your power. Your life does not change when your thoughts change. It changes when your behavior changes. And behavior changes when standards replace negotiation. There will not be fireworks after this. No cinematic transformation. Just a quiet moment. A decision. A small action. Maybe you stand up. Maybe you send the message. Maybe you begin the task you've delayed. It won't feel dramatic. It will feel simple. And that simplicity is the point. Because transformation was never hiding in a breakthrough. It was hiding in a step. Thinking is ruining your life. But only if you let it lead. When you place action first. When you move before your mind constructs excuses. When you choose expansion over comfort. Thinking becomes an ally. Sharp. Focused. Supportive. No longer dominant. No longer paralyzing. Just useful. You were never incapable. You were never lacking talent. You were never missing clarity. You were waiting. Waiting for certainty. Waiting for readiness. Waiting for permission. There is no permission coming. There is only decision. And now you stand at the simplest crossroads. Think more. Or move. The old pattern would sit with this moment. Reflect on it. Analyze it. Plan how to apply it later. The new pattern does something different. It acts. Before the mind starts negotiating again. And this time, when you hear the sentence, thinking is ruining your life, you will not feel attacked. You will feel reminded. Reminded that your power was never in your thoughts. It was always in your next move.